number of people asking for that. So once again, I'm Jeff Eddings with 1001 New Worshiping Communities. Happy to have you all here and very excited to have Brian McLaren with us. And Brian needs less of an introduction than I, as he's a very popular writer and speaker. And I remember very fondly first encountering a new kind of Christian and how it helped kind of me in my faith formation. I consider Brian a spiritual dad. And so, Brian, really excited and glad to have you with us tonight.
I'm so happy to be with you, and I'm a big fan of your important and beautiful work, and glad to be with this great group of people tonight.
Yes, thanks for being such a gracious and generous friend to the 1001 New Worshiping Communities movement. And as we get going to tonight, I do, well, first I want to, if you wouldn't mind, y'all just mute yourselves because I hear a little background noise. But I would love for us to first just kind of acknowledge the moment that we're holding here on October 7th, the 2 year anniversary of the attack on Israel by Hamas, which resulted in um, close to 1,200 deaths of Israelis and close to 240 Israelis being taken hostage, some of which are still captive, maybe alive, maybe dead. And then resulted, of course, in the response from Israel, which has led to the death of over 67,000 Palestinians, over 20,000 children, and close to 170,000 that mute. There we go. I got that one. So I want us to have a minute of silence so that we might be quiet and hold that whole scenario, the whole situation in our hearts and before God in prayer. And then I'm going to read a prayer from Black Liturgies, Cole Arthur Riley's very wonderful book. And then we will share. And her prayer is a lament for those grieving global terrors. And then we'll share in a breath prayer together. But friends, let us first just hold ourselves in a posture of silence together. Let us pray. God, who is moved to tears, we have become desensitized to the cries of our neighbor. We confess that the trauma and terror of the world roll off us like oil. Help us to never become so familiar with pain that we grow disinterested in collective liberation. But keep us from that obsessive attunement which is prone toward savior complexes and feigned allyship. Lead us into a kind of solidarity that reminds us that in pausing to bear witness to suffering, we do not center ourselves as the rescuer. We do not become the voice. Free us from the responsibility to understand every tragedy at once. Help us to discern our capacity for solidarity, for lament. Help us to learn when to stand and when to rest and allow others to do so. remembering that our activism is shared among a collective. We don't have to hold it alone. Amen. And now I invite us to share in this breath prayer together. And we'll just go through it a couple times from Cole's book. As you inhale, say, "How long, O God?" Exhaling, "This is too much to hold." Inhale, "I am not okay." Exhale, "God, with you, I am safe." I don't have to hold every pain at once. I can feel and not be consumed. I won't rush my grief. These tears are sacred. And let us just breathe this prayer one more time together. How long, O God? This is too much to hold. I am not okay. God, with you, I am safe. I don't have to hold every pain at once. I can feel and not be consumed. I won't rush my grief. These tears are sacred. All God's people say, Amen. Thank you, friends. So, Brian, I do feel it's kind of obviously it's appropriate that we take time to acknowledge what's happening
Yeah.
in Gaza, but also there's so much that's happening around the world. War still in Ukraine, our current political situation here in America, ongoing environmental destruction. There's just so much that's happening, and I imagine that's why many of us have shown up in this space tonight for this particular conversation with you. And so the other thing I would now invite everybody to put into the chat is just I wonder, how are you all arriving tonight? Is there a word, a phrase, a metaphor that kind of describes just where you are and how you're feeling as you're entering into this space tonight? And the word that I've been feeling and thinking about is just knots. Like I'm arriving with kind of knots in my head and in my spirit and in my heart. And it feels like each news cycle, the knots just get a little tighter, like harder and harder to kind of unwind and unknot. And I'm wondering, Brian, if you wouldn't mind sharing, how are you arriving tonight?
Mm. You know, there's a line in the what you read from Cole Arthur Riley. Uh, I forget the exact words, but it's the sense that we have to feel what we have to feel and simultaneously know that we can't bear it all. We can't contain it all. And so this feeling of simultaneously feeling a lot and acknowledging it doesn't take long until my cup of grief is full or my cup of anger is full or whatever it is, you know. So yeah,
Mhm.
it's that paradox of feeling and yet being aware that I can't contain it all.
Yeah, yeah. And and so what we have been doing this past year, and I've mentioned this to you, Brian, and sent you some information, is this Sabbath lab, this
Mhm.
innovation Sabbath lab, as one of the ways of like trying to find ways to hold it, to hold
Mhm.
all the things. Sabbath is a command that's given to us. It's an invitation that's offered to us.
Mhm.
But we don't tend to do it real well. So I
Mhm.
created this Sabbath lab as an opportunity for folks to come together in a cohort once a month and to read and reflect on Sabbath, and more importantly, to be, practicing Sabbath and seeing how that like impacts our life. So what I'd love to to hear from you in a moment here is what is your Sabbath kind of definition, and how would you answer this particular dot 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 Sabbath is? One of the books that we read in our journey is by Abraham Heschel, a classic book called The Sabbath. And I pulled all these little Sabbath is from out from his book. Like Sabbath is when we care for the seed of eternity placed in the soul. Sabbath is not an interlude, but the climax of living. Sabbath is creating a home in the soul to be with the divine. It is a chance to mend our tattered lives. Sabbath is turning from the results of creation to the mystery of creation. Sabbath is a day to stop worshiping the idols of tech civilization. And he wrote this sometime in the 40s. Sabbath is a day to abandon plebeian pursuits and reclaim our authentic selves. And it's a day to remember our belovedness. And Sabbath is resting as if all your work is done, resting even from the thought of work. So, Brian, do you have a definition? What's your working definition of Sabbath? What is Sabbath for you?
Mhm. So I have two answers, but first I have to say all of those from Rabbi Heschel are so interesting. It feels terrible to rush on to anything I might say without pausing on the brilliance of so many of all of those. But I'll offer my two little one sort of completions to that sentence. First, Sabbath is resting before I'm tired.
Mm,
Um, and I know we often speak of Sabbath as the last day of the week, but I also like to think of it as Sabbath is what comes before the first day of the week. In other words, before we begin work. And even the idea in the Jewish mind that the new day begins at sunset. And so we get to go through the night and sleep first before the next day. This sense of the rest before we begin so that we aren't all, and that's helpful for me because I've got a, obviously I'm getting older and this is less true now, but for a lot of my life, I've had a pretty good constitution, meaning I could keep pushing and keep pushing and keep pushing before I felt tired. And the idea that hold it, it's better to rest before you're tired and rest, or let's be more honest, to rest before I'm completely exhausted and carve that time out. So that's my first. And my second is Sabbath is claiming my right to be a human being, not just a producer and consumer. Um, and if I could just offer one additional reflection on that. I before everyone arrived, Jeff and I were talking, and I was sharing with him that I'm turning 70 next year, um, and you know, and I don't know what if there will be a retirement for me in the traditional sense, partly because as a writer, I actually love writing. It's what I love to do for fun. But I've had this awareness as I, moved through my 60s and now towards my 70s that we give older people permission to take it easy. We give older people permission to rest without working. The only other group of people we do that really with is children. I suppose for people with some kinds of disabilities, we give them that permission too. But really for children and for old people, and I had this feeling a few months ago, like, wow, the system of production and consumption has had me for all these middle years of my life. And could I be approaching years when I don't feel I'm part of that system anymore? So
mm,
that sense of freedom to be a human being, apart from the claims of our economic work system.
yeah, that's great, and I really appreciate you saying it's resting before you're tired.
Yeah.
Because I try to offer a lot of opportunities for pastors to rest or Sabbath retreats or some grants around Sabbath and sabbaticals. And too often people are taking those because they're already
Yeah.
exhausted. They've already hit like the breaking point of things. Um, and the idea of like Sabbath making us fully human.
Yeah.
Like this is it's kind of the completion of creation.
Yeah.
and it's what completes creation. It also, in a very deep sense, I think, completes us and allows us to be fully human.
Because it's a command in the Bible and because of the twisted way that traditional Christian theology treats commands as opportunities to prove how imperfect we are, um, I think that pollutes the idea of Sabbath for us. And, um, it's something we have to do in order to be correct or even to be healthy or well balanced. But
Mhm.
I think that's a distorted idea from our theological background of what a command really is. And I made friends a few years ago with a really brilliant writer named David Bodanis, and David shared with me a manuscript. He's an atheist, at least last time I talked to him, he was. Um, but he wrote a book about the Ten Commandments as an atheist. And when he and his big framework for the Ten Commandments were that this was an ancient, I've never said this word out loud. I don't know if I'm saying it right, but suzerainty treaty, but a treaty from Middle East societies. And uh, and what the treaty does is it says, here's the rules that we'll agree on to bind our civilization or bind our society together. And what David Bodanis suggested in his manuscript, which is still not published, I hope he'll publish it someday because I thought it was brilliant. But what he suggests about Sabbath as a command is Sabbath is a way of saying all the nations around us are slave owning nations. Slavery is an essential part of the economy. They're in those pyramidal economies with a few people at the top and a whole lot of people who never get a break at the bottom. And and he said to make this statement that one day out of seven nobody works, we we have to make that rule as a society because if we don't shut down the economy for a day, you know, a lot of people are going to be working. So this idea that slavery and constant work is no way to live. And so for our people, we're going to shut everything down a day a week rather than a command to be perfect. It's a way to keep from getting sucked into this pattern that's so common.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like to use like invitational language around it.
Yes, yes,
Jesus is just very invitational and he invites us like to the abundant life,
yes,
right? He doesn't invite us to burnout or weariness or to
yes,
be tired, and in that passage where he's talking about the abundant life, it's the sheep and he's the gate, and he
yeah,
talks about all the thieves that come in to
yeah,
steal the
yeah,
abundant life.
yeah,
So that's always one of my questions. What is like trying to steal the abundant life? And some of the things you name, of course, consumerism,
yeah.
and some things that Trisha Hersey names in her book, Rest is Resistance, which we'll get to as well. Um, Brian, I want to throw out a few of our hypotheses
Mm,
that we were working with in the lab
yeah.
and see if you have any to add on. Um, And so here was just like some things about like what Sabbath can produce. Like in a good lab, you have a hypothesis and you're going to see if it's you practice it and see what happens. And so we were working with some ideas like, well, Sabbath can transform your life. Sabbath can create space in us to resist injustice, trauma, and violence. Sabbath makes us more compassionate and responsive to the needs of others. Sabbath reminds us of who God is, the lover, and who we are, beloved. Sabbath reminds us we are enough, and Sabbath is the key to the abundant life. Do you have any hypotheses you'd like to throw in there?
Yeah, I do. First, I love all of those. Uh, let me offer two. One comes from a song by my favorite musician, Bruce Coburn. He has a song called "Don't Forget About Delight," and
Mhm.
so I think in some ways Sabbath, and it connects to what you're saying about abundant life. Sabbath is this reminder that if we're working all the time, we won't have time to just play. We won't have time to just have delight. We won't have time to just enjoy. And so don't forget about delight. Sabbath is this invitation, opportunity, reminder, protection over childhood joy and the joy of children who don't have to work every day, who just get to play and have fun.
Mm.
A rabbi friend of mine who passed away a few years ago was very public when people ask him about Sabbath. Well, he'd say, "Well, of course, we always begin with a really good meal." And he said, "Then my wife and I have really good sex." and and I just loved
Whoa,
that.
whoa, there are a bunch of Presbyterians here, Brian. Hold on.
I just loved that this rabbi was like, this isn't like an option on the Sabbath. This is every Friday night. We make sure, because we don't want to get too busy to miss that delight. So that's the first thing, delight. And then the second I'll mention, and then we can talk about either of them if you'd like. But the second is creativity. I
Hmm.
think the Sabbath is the seedbed of creativity because I bet we've all had this happen. You're dealing with a problem, or those of us who write, you're trying to write something, you can't get the breakthrough. And you're driving along the road, or you're taking a shower, or you're mowing your lawn. And for me, it often happens when I'm taking a long drive. And in a certain sense, there's nothing to do except I'm driving. And and then the idea comes, the creative idea comes. And I'm always pulling out my phone and recording the idea because I might not remember it by the time I pull my car over and stop. But just this sense of freeing up the mind to let creativity happen. So those are the two uh,
Yeah.
hypotheses I'd add.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. Yeah, I was fortunate enough to take a 3-month extended study leave earlier this year, but the study leave was about Sabbath, so very much Sabbath inclined and
Yeah,
directed. And I found like that extra space and time, like some creativity in me around writing and around reflections and poems, like which had been a little bit dormant for a long time, like really sparked. But I realized it was just because it had space
yeah,
to expand and to actually become present to me.
yeah.
So I love that idea of just allowing giving ourselves space for that the creative impulse. And sorry, I love the word delight.
Mm,
Like we don't take enough delight.
yeah,
I think, um, and in I think it's Psalm 30, around 35, maybe 37. It talks about the Lord wants to give us the delights of our heart
yeah.
and how Sabbath like gives us that space for God to give us those delights.
I might be misquoting this, but I think there's another psalm that says, "In God's right hand are delights forevermore."
Mm,
So
yeah,
it's a good word.
yeah, yeah. Or Psalm 16 talks about a delightful inheritance.
Yeah.
Receive our delightful inheritance from God. Oh, and I forgot to add one because I like my Sabbath is dot dot dot. I like to say Sabbath is the day I don't have to figure anything out.
Yeah.
So if it's something I'm trying to figure out, I can let it go.
Yeah.
So if it's like world injustice, I don't have to figure that out today. Or if it's a weird noise in my car, I don't have to figure that out today.
Mm.
Like it's just kind of a freedom I've found in having that as one of my little Sabbath kind of mantras. Like gets me in a mode of like figuring something out, I can let it go.
Can I just say that rings very true with me, Jeff. At different times in my life, I've had struggles with insomnia, and
Mm.
and there's what I notice when have struggles with insomnia, which is sort of an interruption of my nightly Sabbath, right? The hours of every day that we're supposed to get a chance for our body to rest. I wake up and I'm solving problems, or I'm wrestling with a problem, and I I remember some months ago I was having some insomnia, and the little kind of mantra that I decided to just hold in my mind was, I don't have to fix anything tonight. I don't have to fix anything tonight. And I think it's that,
Yeah.
yeah, it's giving ourselves permission. Yeah,
Yes, that's great. Well, the title of this little conversation is Sabbath as Resistance.
yeah,
So love to like talk about that. Trisha. Hersey's book is Rest is Resistance. And Walter Brueggemann wrote a wonderful book about Sabbath as resistance, saying no to the culture of now a number of years ago. But I have two quotes for us to look at, and then just for to have some conversation around what does it mean, or what are we resisting, and how does Sabbath help us do that? So this first one is from Trisha and from Rest is Resistance. And she says, we must stand and lay firmly in the space of creating a life filled with rest and radical care, even amidst oppression. Rest is resistance is our tagline and mantra, our call. Rest is a form of resistance because it disrupts and pushes back against capitalism and white supremacy. Both these toxic systems refuse to see the inherent divinity in human beings and have used bodies as a tool for production, evil, and destruction for centuries. Grind culture has made us all human machines, willing and ready to donate our lives to a capitalist system that thrives by placing profits over people. The Rest is Resistance movement is a connection and a path back to our true nature. We are stripped down to who we really were before the terror of capitalism and white supremacy. We are enough. We are divine. And then a reading from the Sabbath. There is a realm of time where the goal is not to have, but to be, not to own, but to give, not to control, but to share, not to subdue, but to be in accord. Life goes wrong when the control of space, the acquisition of the things of space, becomes our sole concern. There is happiness in the love of labor. There is misery in the love of gain.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I'd love, Brian, for you to maybe just share some of your thoughts on what Sabbath is as a piece of resistance.
Hmm. Well, let me offer a couple of thoughts very relevant to our current situation. Um, I imagine there'd be some people on this call who will not agree with what I'm about to say, and that's fine if you don't. I'm just expressing my personal opinion. But I think we're in the midst of an authoritarian takeover of not only our nation, but many different nations in the world. And I think one of the characteristics of authoritarianism is that authoritarians like to keep everybody on edge and keep everybody afraid so that then they can propose themselves and their regime as the only solution to that problem. And in order to resist the onslaught of authoritarian encroachment, we have to be aware of their tactics, their techniques. And one of their techniques is constant propaganda. A well-known figure in American politics these days is, to me, a truly scary person, Steve Bannon, who very explicitly said that the goal is to flood the zone with BS, flood the zone with so many lies that nobody can know what the truth is. So if we understand that authoritarians, part of the way they work is by flooding us with fear and lies and all the rest, just to barrage us with constant craziness and assault on any attempt to stay sane. This destabilizes people enough, and that's all advantage to an authoritarian regime. So interestingly, those times when we say to ourselves, I am not going to expose myself to the message of authoritarian structures and systems who are trying to barrage me with their messages
Mm.
constantly. And of course, sometimes this means as simple as giving ourselves permission to turn these off because these become these amazing channels for think of this, the richest people in the world who control the technology and create and leverage and design the algorithms who have such clever methods of giving us little dopamine hits to stay in contact with the system. To me, this is part of what Sabbath is freedom from it, and it's a way, it's a resistance, because if I can say it like this, if I'm constantly being exposed to prefabricated thoughts that are trying to be imposed upon me, I lose track of my own thoughts.
Mm, yeah.
If I'm being messaged all the time, then I lose track of my own message. And so this to me is a part of the resistance of Sabbath and rest and withdrawal and solitude and silence that is especially important in an authoritarian time. And then in that first quote, when authoritarianism is mixed with capitalism, we have a name for this. We call it oligarchy. And oligarchy is when the people who have the most power also have the most wealth and use their wealth to consolidate more and more power. And and this to me is another sort of gift of Sabbath, that it tells us these people who control this economy have so much power already. Look, for this day, for this week, we are going to say, I just don't want to, I just don't want to even treat them as worthy of my attention. So those would be a few of the thoughts that come to mind in response to that question, Jeff.
Yeah, and Nicole put in the chat, I think the right metaphor is the fire hose. Drinking from the fire hose is what they have us doing.
Yeah.
And Sabbath, allowing us space to not need to do that, to ground us. Um, how has that just showed up in your life, Brian? I'd love to hear, like, has there been times, because you as a public figure, you are often in the fire. You're in the
Yeah.
firing. People are coming at you for things you're saying. Um, I would love to hear a little bit how Sabbath has helped you take a posture of
Mhm.
resistance, and just what are your practices?
Yeah. Well, let's first of all say, Jeff, something that I think everybody knows. Social media is an incredible tool, and it is also a very dangerous tool. Um, what did Nietzsche say? Beware when fighting the monster, lest you become the monster. And so there, I
Mm,
think we all just have to be aware of the ways that becoming human beings who are so linked via social media, it has it has effects on us. And we're all part of this giant social psychological experiment going on with billions of people around the planet.
mm,
And we're participating willingly or unwillingly in this giant experiment. And we don't know
yeah.
what its sociological effects are, what its psychological, spiritual, personal, familial effects are. Um, but so for me, as someone, I was sort of innocent, naive, and lucky in that my first involvement with social media, first through, remember when blogs were a new thing, and somebody told me about a blog. Well, I'm a writer, and I actually loved doing it. It was fun for me to be a blogger. And then when Twitter came out, I actually enjoyed Twitter. I just had fun with it. And then that gave me a big following over time. Honestly, I wasn't motivated. I mean, if I was motivated by this, it was very little. I wasn't motivated by how do I build my following or build my platform, as people say now. I just did it because it was fun and I sort of enjoyed, and I'm old enough, I got to do it for a long time. And so it started to build. But there comes a tyranny with that. And I remember when Elon Musk bought Twitter, I became deeply suspicious of it, and I very quickly noticed the changes that were happening. And I have not deleted my Twitter account, but now I get no joy out of Twitter. I when I do it, I'm usually doing it because I'm trying to inject something good into the system. And I'm have a few other social media accounts too. But a big part of my life in this is as I was saying before, Solitude and silence become all the more important when we're being barraged, whether it's by political BS that's people are intentionally flooding this zone with, or whether it's by advertising, or whether it's by different kinds of crazy grown-up peer pressure and all the rest, which is what a big part of social media is, I think. It's like creating junior high school peer pressure for people of all ages. So yeah. Solitude and silence just become a vacation, a necessary vacation from that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Do you have any just thoughts or quick advice for like all of us? I mean, we're all, like you said, willingly or not willingly, it's a part of our lives, social media platforms, all the things. And for those of us, like you have a particular voice, people are usually probably anticipating what is Brian going to say about what's happening now. And we look to you for some wisdom and for some guidance. But what about us who have no platforms, but
Yeah.
still feel compelled? Like, shouldn't I put something out
Yeah.
there so that my friends and family will become enlightened and see things my way?
Yeah.
Um, and for me, it's always been a struggle. I haven't posted anything like politically since the election because when I posted on election day, that didn't go well. When a former member of my church, I posted something about black and brown people and immigrants, and he said, "Well, my son was killed by an illegal immigrant in a car accident. So I'm all for sending them, and it was just unhelpful."
Yeah.
So, any advice to us who are just struggling with that space?
Yeah. Maybe I'd say something that police officers sometimes say when you get pulled over. And then I would say the opposite. The first thing I'd say is you have the right to remain silent, and you also have the right to not remain silent. And this is part of where the recollection that comes in solitude and silence helps us. If I feel obligated to speak about everything, first of all, there's a tyranny that comes with that. There are so many issues and there are so many wrong things happening. And if we feel we have to speak about every one of them and we make ourselves vulnerable to criticism because we spoke on these 9 issues, but the other 11 we didn't speak on clearly enough, there's just never an end to it. So you have a right to remain silent. You didn't sign a contract to tell the world that you will speak on every issue and you'll have something to say. Look, people get paid a lot of money for that, uh, and if they're paying you to do it, then I suppose you have to do it. But the rest of us, that pressure, I don't think is a helpful pressure. But we also have a right to not remain silent. And when, for some whatever the reason, we feel motivated to speak, I think we should feel free to speak. So
Yeah.
and sometimes it helps to explain to people if you're changing your policy. Like, I used to post often and I
Mm.
just decided I'm not going to do that anymore. Nobody seemed to miss it because there's so many smarter and better people than me posting. But, we have a right to say to people, I'm stepping back from posting for a while.
Yeah.
That might make our lives easier and help explain to other people. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Thanks for those thoughts. And I think for me, it's been helpful for me to really wrestle just with like understanding what is mine to do
Yes.
and what is not mine to do.
Yes.
Like you said, around you have the right to remain silent, you have the right to speak. And where is the sense of my calling in that?
Yes.
And I
Yeah.
found that like for me, it's more in the one-on-one space or intimate spaces
Yeah.
to cultivate those places and those conversations, and that the online platforms don't really work for me.
Yeah. And for some people, it is what's theirs to do. I have a
It is.
couple of
Yeah,
friends who are doing so much good through their social media involvement. Can I just tell you a quick anecdote about this?
yeah.
A couple of years ago, I was asked to speak a couple of times for an organization that actually studies how social change is is furthered or hindered through social media. And what they found is that if there's a cause that we all care about, right? And and so we get a lot of people to post about this cause and about how we care about it. If there are mean people on our side, people we agree with who are being mean to other people who disagree,
Mm.
those
Mm.
people are doing way more harm. And so, what this group found is the most important work that people who care about a cause can do on social media sometimes is going to the people who they agree with who are being jerks
Mm.
and gently, in various ways, try to intervene with them and encourage them not to be their tone police, but to pass on data to them that will help them understand they could be a lot more effective if they weren't so mean.
Yeah, how are we being invited to show up as a force of love in the world in
Exactly.
those kind of
Exactly.
spaces? And I'm grateful for those that do show up as a force of love in those spaces. And
Yeah.
we have some 1001 leaders that's their
It's
space, and they
super
are a
important.
great
Yeah.
voice and prophetic. And so I just want to say I'm grateful for those that do that
Yes.
work. I'm just understanding maybe it's not my work to do.
And it may have been your work 2 years ago, and it may be your work in 2 years in the future. And this is another reason Sabbath is important. We sometimes have to slow down enough and sort of listen. I, I'm getting ready to speak up again, or I feel like I've become kind of shrill. I think I should pull back,
Yeah.
to have that time to get in touch with ourselves. And for me, that usually happens when I'm taking a walk or when, I'll say to my wife, can we process some things I'm working through or some other good friend? So, yeah.
Yeah. Can we circle back to those practices? Your practices. I'd love to hear like how does Brian McLaren, you said silence and solitude, but can you share a little bit about how this shows up practically in your life? Do you take a
Yeah.
full day? Do you light candles? What if you
Yeah.
don't mind, Brian,
Yeah.
sharing
No.
your reflections there?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. But the only honest answer I can offer is this, that it has changed a lot over time. So I am very, very fortunate. When I was 19 years old, a friend gave me the book Practicing the Presence of God by Brother Lawrence
Mm.
and gave me a little notebook and just showed me how every day he wrote a prayer and wrote a few, had a passage of the Bible that he read, wrote some reflections on that, and just used that as a place to sort of journal his thoughts. And journaling became a super important practice of Sabbath and rest and withdrawal for me, sort of my a daily a little daily withdrawal into solitude and silence. Super important for me. In fact, I'm going to burn them. I just haven't gotten around to doing it. But in my garage, I have several bins full of these old journals
Yeah.
that are. I always say I'm going to go back and read through them. I did that once, maybe 20 years ago, but maybe I don't know if I'll do it again. But when I became a professional writer, the practice of journaling changed for me. And it's not because writing became work, it's because writing was a continuing expression of that same discipline. Whenever I write, it's in the same kind of spirit. So that what was the most important single practice of my life ended up becoming something else, and I needed new practices to replace it. So in my life these days, a morning walk outdoors where I just let the sky and the trees and the birds and the soil and the seasons and the weather and where I live, the humidity and the mosquitoes, um, reground me in the natural world. That's been such an important thing. I remember a few years ago, I took a long walk and I came home and Grace, my wife, said, how was your walk? And I said, human beings are a mess, but the birds are being awesome. And that's become my little mantra
Great.
to notice the things in nature that are going along just fine, no matter how horrible human beings are. Let me say two other things about my own practices. One is my life has not been regular. For many years I was a pastor. So where Sunday might be a day of rest for some people, Sunday was my hardest work day. And Saturday was my day among other, doing soccer games with my kids and all the stuff of being a dad also was knowing that I had the pressure of Sunday. So for many years, Monday was my day off. For many years, Thursday was my day off. But um, that became very, very important to me to have a day. And for me, it wasn't a day to be spiritual, it was a day to be human. Um,
Mhm.
I got paid to be spiritual. I needed a day to have fun, and I needed a day to, I needed a day where I only prayed because I wanted to, not because I had to. Uh, so that was important. And then the other thing I'd say though is in the last almost 20 years now, my life has been irregular in another way that I do a lot of travel and I seldom have a week that is anything like a normal week. Um, and so what that means is I have to be creative. I don't have regularity I can work with, but
Mm,
I do still find times. And let me just give a very practical example that I'm going through right now. The way my life has worked for these last 20 years is I have commitments for speaking that are usually about 18 to 24 months in advance. So that means if I want to slow down, I have to put my foot on the brake 18 months before I'm going to stop.
yeah.
And so 18 months ago, I said in 2026, I'm not going to take any speaking engagements. I'm turning 70. I feel like that's giving me a chance to say, what do I want to do when I grow up? So I need time for discernment and I need time where I'm not out uh, speaking and traveling for work. And so I did a very predictable and immature thing because I knew I'm taking next year off. I said yes to way too many things this year. So this year has been a year far from balance, especially this last from about June until November of this year.
Yeah.
Way too busy, not enough rest at all. But it's going to make the rest very, very sweet starting in December when I don't have anything on my schedule for a period of
Wow.
time.
That's awesome to hear. I'm sure we're all a little bit sad about that, but I'm excited for you.
Well, thank you.
And I'm so glad you are modeling for us like the importance of that kind of space. And you named a few things that we've like been wrestling with in the Sabbath lab. And one is that Sabbath was originally given to a particular people to be done in a particular way, in a particular place and time, right? And it was very communal. And it's so hard for us to kind of connect to that communal space of
Yeah,
everybody doing this practice in a certain way. And
yeah,
so we've wrestled with, well, what is it in different seasons of life?
yes.
When you have little children, you might not be able to go for that walk in the morning. I'm sure you didn't. You probably didn't do the walk.
No, exactly right. I didn't.
Like,
No.
and it's always so it's how do we give ourselves permission
Yeah,
show up in these different places in our life, still allowing ourselves to take rest and to find different ways to practice Sabbath
yeah,
in ourselves, but also somehow with others, whether it's our family or that's why I wanted these cohorts to come together. So in a sense, we were all trying to find our way to Sabbath, but at least we were also connecting together to figure out what it might look like. And
yes.
one of our leaders at one point who has young kids, a busy church, coined the phrase Sabbath snacks. He looks to take her Sabbath snacks in
I
the,
love it. I love
and
it.
I just think that's brilliant. I think it's like we have to acknowledge, yeah, life sometimes is busier than at other times. Like you're in a busy season right now, but that doesn't mean we can't rest.
Yeah,
Like we still can claim that rest and that time. Um, And so I want to give a lot of like ample room for folks to ask questions in a few minutes here. But I want to just have one other question conversation with you, and I'm going to take a little moment to tell a little story, a little vacation story, because on my 3 month sabbatical, I got to visit. Carolyn and I went to England and Scotland for a 3 week trip, which was wonderful. And as part of that, got to visit one of my favorite places. It was becoming my favorite place in the world, Lindisfarne,
mm,
also known as Holy Island. Lindisfarne is in the north, off the northeast coast of England. For those of you that have not heard of it, it's the lesser known Iona. So Iona tends to be the place, the island in Scotland that people have heard about, connected to Celtic Christianity. Lindisfarne is also connected to Celtic Christianity, with Saint Aidan starting a monastery there in 635. Another very important Celtic saint, Saint Cuthbert, is tied to this place. And it is just a beautiful place. It has some ancient ruins of a 13th century cathedral and priory. It's got a really cool little castle built in the 15th century. Um, and my favorite, and also it's famously known as the place where the Vikings first landed in 793 and started doing their Viking thing. So, not a great moment in history for them. But Lindisfarne, my favorite thing about it is it's a tidal island. So when the tide comes in, you can't get off or on to the island. And it's only when it goes out that you can then travel onto or off of the island. My wife and I were fortunate enough to stay on the island for 3 nights. And it was so fascinating to see the rhythm of life there because the tourists would come early in the morning when they could get there, and the island was busy and a beehive of activity, and then they'd have to leave by like 2 or 3 and they'd be gone. And there were still plenty of people on the island, but it just felt quiet and
Mm.
still. And the castle where everybody was buzzing around during the day, we would just go for long walks. And the birds, speaking of the birds, Brian, Lindisfarne Burns are amazing. It's a nature preserve. It was just beautiful and wonderful. And the thing is, I reflected on was, you know what? They could make a bridge. They could make a bridge to this island and just skip the tides, right? And then people could get onto that island 24/7 if they wanted. But you know what that would do? Ruin everything.
Yes.
It would ruin everything. It would take away from the natural rhythm of life that is offered to the people that live on that island and that work on that island. And what I thought was, we have natural tidal rhythms in our spirit,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And in our body. And we can feel it and we know it. But what do? We constantly build bridges around it. We constantly don't take that space or don't pay attention to the tide that is within us, the natural tide and the invitation from God. So, Brian, can you help us reflect on how we can give ourselves permission to pay attention to those natural tides in our own spirit and not build all those bridges around it?
Mm. Yeah. First, thanks so much for sharing that story and describing it in such a delightful way. And the image of tidal flow is such a beautiful image for us. It has regularity, yet it also changes too. Tides are somewhat chaotic, and so they're different each day. Uh,
You have to check the tidal charts to make sure you're going to go on the island at the right time.
at the right time, yes, that's right. So I love that, and I have a feeling this is, of course, the idea in the Hebrew scriptures of the Sabbath for the land every 7 years, giving the crops, giving the soil a time off, is also recognition that there are different periodicities for different that nature has built in that are required. And there's that wild and wonderful provision for the year of Jubilee that suggests that maybe every 50 years economies need to have a major reset. And if we don't do it intentionally, it's going to happen accidentally, it seems.
Mhm.
Um, but uh, here's the thing. I don't know I don't know what individual people want to do about this, but I do know what groups of people want to do. And I'm in a bit of a emphasis these days to realize how much power a very small number of people have who are making the most money. And they're deeply loyal to a system. They're in their mind, their life does not depend on tides and seasons and soil and rain and water and sunlight. Their lives depend on debt and uh, marketing and all of the
Yeah.
obsessions of our economic system. And it's true. We've created a system that we're dependent upon that puts immense unnatural, unlivable pressure on people. And I suppose part of what I want to do in responding to your story is to just say, let's remember that there are tides. Let's remember that there are natural forces that no technology can ultimately circumvent forever. And part of me hears your story, and I just say to myself, how can we help our bodies and our individual lives and our families and our congregations and maybe someday our cities and states and nations? They certainly aren't there now, but how can we help all of us to come back into a harmony with sustainable rhythm, the rhythm of life, the speed of life, rather than the speed of electricity and this and so on?
Mm. Yeah, the struggle, the very human struggle to like take the space and take the rest it's always been with us. My favorite, one of my favorite scriptures from Isaiah chapter 30, verse 15 says, in repentance and rest is your salvation, in quietness and trust is your strength. And that's beautiful, right? In repentance and rest is our salvation. It didn't say in a lot of work, in overworking is your salvation.
Ah,
It said in rest and repentance as returning to God.
mm,
And then in quietness and trust is strength to
yeah,
those like solitude, to the silence, to the contemplative posture.
yeah.
Um, but the very next, I'm not done with that verse. The very next part of that verse says, but you would have none of it.
Mm, 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 mm.
And it's just so piercing
Yeah,
that this is what God is offering us.
yeah,
And God wants us to have all of it.
yes,
And yet in our little hearts, it's hard for us. And we resist or we build the bridge around it.
yeah, yeah.
So, and the last metaphor I want to throw out there, it's not mine, it's from Pete Scazzero, emotionally healthy church guy. He said that Sabbath is a meant to be like a snow day.
I love that. I just love it.
And
Yeah.
it's great because if you reflect back on what like a snow day was as a kid, unfortunately, kids today get some of their snow days ripped off because they have to do like online Zooms or like it's terrible. I feel so bad for the kids today. But when I just remember waking up as a kid, and if it was a snow day, if you heard your school on the radio of all things, it was just like freedom. You just felt freedom and spacious and we are invited to that. We're invited to have snow days 52 days a year,
That's great.
which you were excited if you got one or two of them, you're regular. So that's a metaphor to leave everybody with. But I would love just to open it up. Brian, you got any other thing you want to throw in there before we open it
No.
up for some questions?
Yeah, eager to hear folks' questions and comments.
Great. So please, friends, you can either just unmute yourself and offer up a question, or if you want to put something in the chat, love to hear from you.
So this is not a question, but this is Sabrina. I was just thinking, I was looking, writing is very therapeutic for me. And I thought of a poem that I wrote on just a part of it, and it had to do with winter. And it said, I was talking about my little cat. It said, "Here, Whiskers, come snuggle with me and warm my side of the bed. Your vibrating purr, so soothing, erasing for a moment the frenzied fuel circling in my head. Lord, help me. Lord, quiet the demands of the busy day. Let me rest in your warmth and feel your pulse, the vibrations of your heart."
Oh, thank you for sharing that. So beautiful.
That's wonderful, Sabrina.
Thank you. And to have the presence of God imaged as the vibration of a cat purring next to you. I love that. I
Yeah,
love that.
that is great. Thank you, Sabrina. Zach has one in the chat. Do you think there is an inherently political dimension of the call to Sabbath? Thinking of the description of the command in Deuteronomic accounts that references the Exodus?
I think the background to just about everything in the Hebrew scriptures and therefore in the Christian scriptures is not what Christian theology told us, the threat of going to hell and dealing with the theological system of original sin and all that. I think the backdrop to the Bible is slavery. It's oppression. And it's oppression by the wealthy and powerful who want to manipulate as many people as they can to work as hard as they can to make their lives feel more secure and more easy and more luxurious. So I think that's the backdrop, and I think it's a sign of how much those people have controlled Christian theology that we don't see it that way. And I hope we will come to see it that way more and more as we go forward. So yes, I think overwork is not a personal failing; it's a system. You know, we make it sound like that, I mean, well, there's so many roots to this. I could go on a little tangent of Charles Darwin and survival of the fittest, which is a very bad, we have twisted that from what Charles Darwin originally meant from it. But we have this idea we have to work harder, we'll all die. Because I love nature, because I love animals, because I love plants, look, the leaves are about to fall in most places in the world. Trees rest for almost half the year, and so many plants rest for half the year. Um, if you know anything about animals, I can't think of an animal that's always busy. Even beavers hibernate, right? Um, uh, there is so much leisure built into life. And uh, and the system that human beings create of constant pressure and constant work, it doesn't have to be this way. We can't even imagine it not being this way because we have been bred for civilization for so many centuries. And when we say the word civilization, we don't even realize to what a degree that's this total fabrication. And so fabrication, I mean a construction. It's a human construction. And so I think the amount of rest and joy that would be there if we had a chance to reboot, yeah, I think it would be surprising to us how much fun we'd have.
Ryan, this is a Grace. I used to be with the Wild Goose Christian community. I'm
Oh,
not there
great to
anymore.
see
I
you,
moved
Grace.
to, yes, I'm in Texas right now. Um, uh, Recently, I'm rereading your book, The Life After Doom.
Yes.
Hard to bring it out in this subject of Sabbath, but for me, the Sabbath, uh, in the beginning, I learned to practice to be resilient. And
Mm,
now I see the Sabbath as in spite of.
mm,
And it is just amazing how much it feels different from when I first read your book after the Wild Goose Festival coming back home. I was listening that book
mm,
and how it feels so different this
mm,
year.
mm,
We are so very much a different world, it seems like,
mm.
in 2025. And do you find that Sabbath, in spite of this year, how much has become more challenging, um, and finding the conversation around that subject, what the direction of a shape is it taking into?
Mm. Yes. Well, first of all, Grace, it's great to see you and hear your voice again. It's been too long. Um, yes, Grace, I think uh, I'll just say writing that book uh, had a big effect on me that continues to unfold to help me see and become more suspicious of the systems of our civilization. And it is making me see Jesus and the gospel and the original idea of what it meant to be a disciple or a member of an ecclesia, a member of an alternative community. It's making me see that in a much more radical light, radical in the sense that it's saying that we we're looking at the system and its pace and its assumptions and its the common sense of the system, and we're saying this is inhuman, this is inhumane, we don't have to live this way, we don't want to live this way, and we're going to try to find ways to help us live with more sanity. And I think about a dear friend of mine who passed away last year, Dr. Barbara Holmes. And Barbara wrote a book called Crisis Contemplation. And she looked at the Black church in American history as a way for people who were put in an inhuman, unsustainable situation where they said, we've got to carve out spaces and times and places where we can be human beings because the system that we were born into that tries to control us is inhumane. And I'm coming to feel that that's just true on so many levels. And so for all of you who would say, let's be part of a Sabbath experiment and uh, let's work on this. I think what your instincts are so right to say there are better rhythms to live by. And maybe one last thing I'll say, Grace, I'm not recommending, this is a great book if you have time to read it, but don't feel any pressure to read it. But there's this wonderful book called by Barbara Ehrenreich called Dancing in the Streets. And she looks at these eruptions in history of spontaneous dance when people would create festivals
Mm.
to just have fun and dance and play music and all the rest as a kind of rebellion against tyrannical systems. And what she does in her book is she holds the military march and the spontaneous dance as two, one as the regulation of those in power to get us to march in step, or as the expression of freedom,
Mm.
to whether it's to get together and dance or to get together and have a love feast, have a meal where we break down the social conventions of a very class-oriented society, and we say that what really matters is to get together and love. Again, I think the Christian religion, our religion, has so tainted this because we turned the Eucharist into, a celebration of. Uh, Not even a celebration, but a, a, a reification or reindoctrination of how sinful we are and how God wants us to really feel miserable. It's very different from the idea of a love feast, of a gathering to celebrate love and freedom. So I think there's so much there for us to reclaim. And I feel, Grace, the older I get, the more radical I become in these ways.
Brian, I got a couple questions in the chat. One that I feel is important for our pastors to maybe hear a little bit about. I know I would be struggling with this if I was pastoring a community right now. It's from Lindsay. She says, Brian, as a pastor, the need to preach in this difficult political space means a need to constantly find hope. I wonder if you could speak to a balance between being able to rest in expressions of bitterness and despair and the work of preaching hope.
Oh my, oh my. Thank you so much. Look, I feel a lot of people are resonating with that question uh, because hope is absolutely essential, but hope can be kind of tyrannical because there's a certain tyrannical kind of hope that says we have to put a nice bow on everything. We have to make people feel good at the end of every sermon. Leave them with hope sort of means tell them everything's going to be okay. And so when I wrote this book, Life After Doom, the 6th chapter is titled Hope is Complicated. And And I struggle with this reality of hope through that whole chapter. And if I can maybe kind of cut to the chase and have a spoiler, I came across some words from Václav Havel, a really interesting person who is head of state in the Czech Republic and also a playwright and poet. It sounds like a very pleasant, a much better combination than having billionaires as heads of state or and so on. But Václav Havel said this about hope. He said, "Hope is not the certainty that things will turn out as we wish. Hope is the confidence that some things are worth doing no matter how they turn out." Let me say it again. Hope is not the certainty that things will turn out as we wish. Hope is the confidence that some things are worth doing no matter how they turn out. And that liberates me to think about hope in a different way. Um, it allows me to disconnect hope from outcomes. And helps me say, what would it mean to live the way we ought to live? And and well, there's so many contexts in which to think about this, but when we think about people who have suffered under oppressive systems for decades, no, for generations, the children were born into oppression, the grandchildren were born into oppression, and you think there was nothing that the first generation of the oppressed could say to promise their children or grandchildren that things would be better. Things were not going to be better for a very long time. But what those parents and grandparents could do is create little spaces where they said, around this dinner table, on this holiday, at this birthday party, at this wedding, we're going to live as free people ought to live in defiance of the oppressive systems that we're born into. We're going to, sociologists have a term for this. They call them temporary autonomous zones. We're going to create zones where we, where we defy those powers that be. So I feel like I've rambled away from what maybe the original question was, but I hope there's something in that rambling that could be helpful for someone.
No, I think, and you've just circled back also to the idea of creating the pocket of resistance,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
in being in that space together. And thanks for that reflection on hope, Brian. Appreciate it.
Can I just say, Jeff, when you began this morning and you had us acknowledge the horror of what happened to Israelis and the horror of what's happened since to Gazans, and you invited us to hold both of those pains. There's a whole lot of people that say you're not allowed to care about both of those things. You're only allowed to care about one. And you defied that expectation by giving us permission to care about both of those, right? And this is so much and to all of you who are preachers, this is so important now. You have to not let Fox News or somebody else set the agenda of what is allowed to be said. Look, it's hard enough to be alive in these times, but to have to pretend that half of the truth isn't true is not
Mm.
fair. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
There's another question from Kevin, and I'm going to relate it to a question somebody sent me that's not able to be here tonight, but would love to hear your input because I think they're related. So Kevin says, how do you see our personal practices of Sabbath being able to help the larger culture reclaim healthy rhythms of Sabbath? So how
Yeah.
do we model this? How is it helping the larger culture? And somebody had sent me a question, how might we introduce Sabbath as resistance within spaces that acknowledge overwork and workaholism? So spaces that, and you find this in the church. You find pastors, I work 70 hours this week. Well, why do you shouldn't celebrate that? Like, how can
Yeah.
Sabbath help us, in those spaces where overwork is celebrated and just how is our Sabbath practice? How can it help the culture
Yeah.
reclaim
Yeah.
rhythms?
Yeah. So, oh my goodness, so much to say there. Let me tell two quick stories that I hope could be helpful. Um, the first one is something that happened to me. What's today? Tuesday night, yesterday morning, Monday morning.
Mhm.
I had, I'm sorry, last Friday morning. I had a blood test that I had to go for, and I've had a couple medical problems lately that have required quite a few blood tests. And when I went in for my blood test at 7:30 in the morning, Maria, who took my blood a couple weeks ago when I was there, she was on duty again. And I said, "Good morning, Maria. How are you? I'm here to give you some more blood." And within a few minutes, Maria told me, "This is my last week of work because I've been diagnosed with a very serious form of cancer,
Mm.
and I'm having major surgery next Monday." Now, I don't think Maria tells everybody that. And Maria doesn't know that I used to be a pastor. Um, I only can think that because I came into to my blood test with a spirit of love and friendliness and peace,
Yeah.
and that when Maria was in my presence, I hope I can say this in a way that makes sense. I think you understand this. I don't mean this in a grandiose way. I mean this in a very down to earth, human way. That Maria felt the presence of love in me, the presence of the Spirit in me.
Mhm.
And what sort of surprised me is she started telling me about about what's ahead for her in the next several months. And another patient came in and sat across the room. He was the next in line for a blood test, and she didn't stop. She just kept telling me in front of this other fellow. And all I could feel, maybe I'm misinterpreting it, but all I could feel is she felt the presence of a person who came in with a peaceful spirit,
Mm.
gave her a little zone of peace to
Yeah.
find some connection. And I think for us being people with peaceful spirits wherever we go, even for the ones who don't tell us something, just that moment of peace will bring them some sustenance and help them survive another day. So that's the first story. Second story. Uh, one of my sons, who's now in his early 40s, when he was 6.5 years old, was diagnosed with leukemia. And I was a very hardworking pastor. I was one of those pastors working over 60 hours a week. And and the chair of my board, after the diagnosis became public, and the chair of the board of the church came over to see me, and he sat on my couch in my living room, prayed with me, and then he said, "Brian, I need to explain something to you. The board has just met, and we feel very strongly that the most important part of your ministry right now is to be there for your son and to be there for your other three children and to be there for your wife. This is going to be a tough time." And he said, "So the board met, and we want you to know it is your current job requirement to work the least number of hours that's possible. If you work more than is necessary, then you will be going against our requirement for you at this time.
Wow.
We want you to take care of yourself, take care of your child, take care of your family, and this is part of your job now to do a good job as a father. Do not work too much for us. If we see you working too hard, we will have some very strong words with you. Do you understand what we're saying to you, Brian?" And he spoke to me with love and with firmness. And I'll just tell you, if that hadn't happened, I don't know where I would be now because things could have gone very differently. I needed him to give me very clear, and I needed my board to give me very clear, not only permission, but a requirement to take care of myself and to take Sabbath seriously for that season. And all I can tell you is when the crisis was over with my son, I remember going to my staff when our church had grown and was quite a bit larger. And I sat down with my staff and I said, "Listen, you are required to work no more than 45 hours a week. If you are working more than 45 hours a week, you're setting a bad example. We'd like you to work 40 hours a week. You're allowed to work up to 45. But if you do more than that, it's not going to go well for us. And so we came up with a way to help if people needed to work more than 45 hours because some special program was coming. We had a way for them to do that, but they would have to take comp time, and we'd have and it became, all of our responsibility to do that. So I would just suggest one thing pastors might want to do is come up with a maximum number of hours that you're allowed to work. And if you need to do more than that, you can maybe figure out for a short time a way to do it. But and it could be a great thing. You can tell them this story if you would like, but they need to. You might be able to go to your board and say, "I need a maximum number of hours I'm allowed to work, and if I have too much to do, I will then come to you, and you'll help me figure out what to stop doing." So anyhow, if that's of use to people, it's a true story from my
That's
own life.
brilliant. That's brilliant. And it is kind of upon us as pastors to talk with our personnel committee or HR committee or whatever, to put those parameters in. If
Yeah.
like you were blessed by a group of people that were like, we're putting these parameters in for you. But
Yeah.
we can do that. We can claim that space
Yes.
ourselves, and we should.
Yes.
We should say, I'm working a maximum number of hours, and that's it. Um,
Yes.
and then we model, for our community what it looks like to
Yeah.
Sabbath and to rest. Well, we just have a few minutes left, but there are two maybe you can speak to quickly, that I think are good reflections here. One, Henny asks, "You said Sabbath is not a spiritual thing, but human. Can you say more about it?"
Well, yeah, and this is, and just another quick anecdote. I once was on the board of a nonprofit, and we were hiring a new CEO, and we were doing interviews, and I remember we were interviewing this potential new CEO for the organization, and we said, "Could you just tell us a little bit about your spiritual life?" And he took a long pause, and he said, "Listen, I've been working in the nonprofit religious world for a long time. I get paid to love God." And he said, it makes it very hard to sincerely love God when you're getting paid for it. So if
Mm.
you're asking me that question to say, do I really love God? Yes, I really love God, in spite of the fact that I get paid for it. He said, but if you want me to brag about my spiritual life to you, to prove to you that I'm a worthy candidate, he said, if I brag about my spiritual life, it actually makes it harder for me to love God. And I just remember it was like a beautiful disruption of this certain kind of piety that we had. So I think the reason I said that I think Sabbath is a human thing is that we create these sort of spiritual pressure, this spiritual one-upsmanship and competition and baselines that we have to prove. And it's tragic if Sabbath becomes something that we have to do to prove how spiritual we are. It becomes part of our work regime again. So I suppose that's why I said that. I hope I hope that explanation is disruptive in the right way.
I think
Yeah.
it's great. And I think because we compartmentalize too much,
Yeah.
our spirituality life versus this life. And it's like our human life is
Yeah.
what you're saying.
Yeah.
I think the last one, and this is a really, I think, thoughtful thought or an interesting thought from Susan. I wonder if there's a connection between a culture afraid of aging and death.
Yeah.
Is it related to its aversion, then related to the aversion to resting, pausing,
Oh,
and
oh,
or resting? Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So you may already know of Ernst Becker and his book, The Denial of Death, but it turns out there's a whole philosophy that has grown up around this idea. He Becker talked about uh, uh, and right at this moment, I'm wondering if Ernst is the right first name, and I might have the wrong last name if anybody wants to Google it and check. But his book was The Denial of Death. But he talks about the human immortality projects, these things that we feel we have to achieve so much
Mm.
in a sense, transcend our death. And I think he really was onto something. And I think one of the problems, another problem I think we have in Christian theology is that we've so centered on the afterlife and heaven that we we have turned heaven into, and then it turns the Christian religion into an immortality project. I think we need a really robust theology of death,
Mm.
um, and not just of the afterlife, but of death. The idea that, look, life is, you know, we all have a terminal case of life. And we're all going to die someday, and other people are going to carry on, and the world will go on just fine with us. My friend Richard Rohr says it this way. He says, we start off thinking that life is about us,
Mm.
and then we eventually, if we're fortunate, come to realize, no, we're about life. And so we get to live. And this thing will go on fine without us after we're gone. Yeah, part of that pressure, I think, is what makes us unable to give ourselves permission to rest.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you Google Immortality Project, you'll find a lot of interesting writing about this
Mm.
reality.
I would love to read a book that you wrote about the theology of death, Brian. So, maybe give you something to do and you're off.
There you go. There you go.
And I love the terminal case of life. Is that what you
Yes.
said? We all have a
Yeah.
terminal case of life. That's great. That's great. Well, one last thing. What was the title on that dancing book again? Somebody wanted to know.
Oh, uh, Dancing in the Streets.
Dancing in the Streets by,
Yes.
did you?
Barbara Ehrenreich, Ehrenreich. One of the most delightful books I've ever read. We did not have a lot of practical use, but it was just a delight to read and fascinating.
That's fantastic.
The subtitle is A
And that,
History of Collective Joy. I
there,
just love that.
there, Sabbath. It doesn't have to have a practical use,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Jeff,
Yes, Sabrina.
so this my favorite memory from the Sabbath study is when the Lord gave me a picture of the little girl on the playground blowing bubbles and saying, "Come, blow bubbles with me."
Mm, 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 mm,
Yeah,
mm.
I love that too, Sabrina. That I marked that down in my little Sabbath notebook when you shared that. And then there somehow goofy glasses being worn got wrapped in.
Yeah, yeah. Heart glasses, heart
Yeah,
glasses.
yeah, heart glasses and bubbles on the playground. There's your final image for this conversation of rest and Sabbath. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you
Really
all.
appreciate you being with us. Thanks, everyone. Grateful for you all being here. I pray that you will all go in peace and that you will have a rest-filled rest of your day. Good
Thank
night,
you,
everybody.
Jeff. Thank you, Brian.
Great
Thank
to be
you.
with you all.
Thank you.
Love you all.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a bubblicious day.
See you in October.